Oh, it's great. You boys staying warm down there? I saw it snowed for like half a day. I know that's tough when you live in.
We shut down here.
Yeah.
we we Southern boys can't handle this. And here we are once again on a Thursday, January 23rd. Welcome to Freightonomics. I am Zach Strickland, head of freight market intelligence. With me, as usual, Tony Mulvey.
Yep.
Senior analyst.
We.
Tony, it's been a wild week of weather in the freight market. Actually, the wild couple of weeks of weather in the freight market. And I wrote a chart of the week article about how winter weather has been more impactful to transportation markets in recent years than hurricanes. And that's something that a lot of people really weren't. I don't think it was like maybe they recognized it, but they didn't think about it.
I think some of that has to do with the state of where the market has been.
Yeah.
Hurricanes haven't been as impactful. Everybody, I think, looks to hurricanes because 2017 and Hurricane Harvey kind of set that bull market run. And there's not been anything that served as a catalyst this time. So it's like they kind of really haven't impacted. But when you think about it, from a winter storms can last... just in Chattanooga, Friday, schools were closed just because expectations were for weather to start moving in. Saturday, a lot of things were closed. Sunday, things were closed. It took 3 or 4 days for things to start moving again. With a hurricane, depending on flooding, it can... It moves pretty quick through an area.
But they have to hit very specific areas to have a long-term impact.
Versus winter weather that doesn't, because if it impacts, say, I don't know, even if you talk about I-40, right? Yeah. If there's snow and ice on I-40 and it's not really passable from Memphis to Nashville, there's no much you can do in terms of ways around that.
Right.
So it's things like that versus disrupting population centers and things like that.
Yeah. These winter weather events didn't really cause a huge surge of rejection, but
it may have stopped some of the depression that we could have felt seasonally.
Yeah, spot rates were sort of responsive to the first couple of systems that came through. We just had a round of record snow in New Orleans, 8 inches. Snowiest day on record there. That was crazy. But New Orleans, not a huge freight center market, not a lot of outbound demand relative to the rest of the country. We still have wildfires going on in California. I think the majority of the impact to freight there will be in the recovery efforts.
Yeah.
And that's more of a long, drawn-out process. It's not like supply chains were disrupted because of the wildfires at this point.
Yeah, no, it definitely doesn't appear that way. But, Zach, I think we have a great show with Dr. Zac Rogers on here, but I think the key is going to be, where do we stand? Where does this market stand? You kind of touched on it, how the winter weather is impacting it. Why not start with the market in 2?
Let's light it up, man.
All right. If you're ready, in 3, 2, 1.
All right. First chart, outbound tender rejection index, the white line there. We're starting to see more of it as we progress into 2025. A little bit of a notch to start the year, thanks to the winter weather that's happened. We've had now 3 pretty significant storm systems, along with pretty solid cold air coming down through the Midwest, as well as to the eastern part of the country, keeping rejection rates relatively high. 7% rejection rates in mid to late January. Certainly not an usual tendency without some sort of help from some sort of exogenous force, such as the weather. We're well above where we were at this time last year. But that was also on the heels of a winter weather event that froze the central part of the United States, and a lot of supply chains broke down. At the time, it was a significant deterioration in the market. Let's look at the spot rate chart on the next one. The NTIL here that you're looking at, you see spot rates have the same type of notch to start the year. Maybe a little lag here as the cold weather may have a lagged influence, but probably not a significant one. Spot rates on the downward turn, about in line with where they were at this point in 2023. Again, a little bit more volatile holiday period in 2023, but this time last year, spot rates were coming up because of the winter weather. We're still above that threshold on the NTIL, which excludes fuel. average drive-in rate. Let's go to the next chart and transition into the maritime space. It's about to be Lunar New Year in 6 days. What does that mean? That means that a lot of shippers import their goods in front of the Lunar New Year as Asian countries shutter production. We're on our way there in 6 days. Looks like shippers got a little bit of a late start to getting their boom in or their orders in. But it looks like we're in line with last year pretty solidly. And last but not least, let's look at intermodal volumes. rail looked like we were going to really have a booming start to January for intermodal containers on the rail. It looks like that is starting to slide a bit, but we are still outperforming this year. And that, of course, is going to be this import and rail intermodal situation is really something to monitor. I think a lot of shippers are concerned about the tariffs and all this upstream disruption. Intermodal has really benefited from the import boom. Just keeping it on a container, keeping it out of warehouses, because those warehousing costs, they really don't deflate. But that being said, I have one piece of something else to throw out there. John Kingston, of course, FreightWaves oil expert, he put out a tweet, and this is fascinating to me. He covers Triumph Pay and their average invoice size over the last bit, so it's not an RPM, and he overlays it with diesel. He worked at S&P Global Platts for years, decades, covering the oil market. So he's showing you in this chart that diesel prices have been deflating over the last several quarters now, and the invoice size is actually increasing. So this to me is saying line haul rates are actually on the rise.
Yeah.
And they would be more on the rise had it not been for diesel. We talked about this in the past, Tony.
Yeah, the one thing it doesn't, because it's in a flat, basically an invoice amount, is the miles driven. And I think you've written a chart of the week that showed that the length of haul is shortening. So length of haul going down, overall invoice going up, while diesel, it suggests that line haul rates are going up. I think one of the interesting things, and it's in the impacts are, we had a holiday this week too. Yeah. So I think that's why you're seeing some of that drastic move lower on the intermodal side is you had an impact from a holiday. Yeah.
MLK, not necessarily a well-known holiday, but it's becoming increasingly a factor with demand.
It's one of those days.
I think more and more companies are allowing their employees to take it off. It's not necessarily a major national holiday.
It is now.
But now it's becoming one.
Yeah, it's more in line with what you've seen at Labor Day and Memorial Day. And so, and if you look, those drops happen both Memorial and Labor Day. So I think that's something to pay attention to this week is maybe don't get caught up in what this looks like this week. Look at it next week and compare it to where it was. And that probably paints a better image of where we are overall. The problem is we're 3 full weeks into January, and each week's been disrupted to some degree by something, right? Winter weather, holidays, and the like. And eventually we'll get something that feels like normal. Yeah. I don't know when that'll be. Hopefully next week.
Yeah, but intermodal volumes, of course, up.
They're still up.
A couple of earnings reports come out. UP, Union Pacific, reported 6% better intermodal volumes. Of course, other things also help them improve their earnings, such as prices on some of their bulk commodities that are moving. And, of course, John Paul Hampstead wrote an article about intermodal volume, long peak continuing. And some of these numbers for the third week of January are just tremendous. And, again, this is comparing year over year, like you said. Yeah. MLK holiday has an influence here.
It does.
That's why some of these numbers are so high. But this is an interesting thing. And this is how I want to transition into talking to Dr. Z. Because he, of course, is the co-author of the Logistics Managers Index. And the way that they look at things is they look at upstream, downstream, they slice it by different types of firms that are involved in this, and all sorts of stuff. So I really want to get his take on, and of course, welcome to 2025, Dr. Zac Rogers. I want to get his take here on what he thinks about all this import situation and this upstream activity that we're seeing. But first off, how you doing, man? How's 2025 treating you?
Oh, it's great. You boys staying warm down there? I saw it snowed for like half a day. I know that's tough.
We shut down here. Yeah. we Southern boys can't handle this.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but you look healthy and hale. Happy New Year, guys.
Yeah, energy is a wonderful thing. But
It is.
again, the power grids shut down in these cold weather storms. That was one of the reasons we actually had schools shut down here, because they were concerned about power grid strain. And that tends to be, connection to supply chain here, that tends to be one of the biggest factors in really disrupting transportation flows and shipping patterns, is
Absolutely.
this infrastructure that really can't handle some of these subarctic temperatures.
No, it's interesting, and it'll be something to look forward to, and to see if they take this disruption. I always think you have to have a disruption happen a couple times before you actually are going to spend money on it. If this is a one-off, whatever. But if we keep getting snow in Chattanooga, I mean, things will change.
Yeah,
And
you're right.
if that happens, by the way, I think Craig should give everybody a cost of living increase, because you got to turn the heater on more. So
Oh my God, you're not lying, man.
You
My
heard it here
gas bill
first.
this month. But let's get started with some LMI, man. I really want to get, you heard the lead in here. Intermodal and import volumes appear to be relatively healthy. Demand is pretty strong.
Yes.
What are you seeing in the LMI right now that tells us anything about this upstream behavior? Are we seeing any changes, or is this just a continuation of what 2024 was?
So we saw in December the biggest split we've ever had for inventory levels upstream and downstream. It's 24 points apart, and that 24 points had 50 in the middle. So yeah, you can see right there, that's overall. So overall, if you just looked at it, this is everybody together, this chart you have here. Inventory levels were at 50.0. That means no change month over month from November to December. But when you parse the data out to upstream with downstream, what you see is that upstream firms reported an increase in data in December, right at about 58. And that's a sort of moderate, where just inventories rolling in. But a lot of inventory was also going out downstream. And so you had upstream inventory going to downstream. And then, as we saw, we had a pretty good holiday. This was one of our better holidays, since I think it's our, the best one we've had on a lot of measures. Particularly when you look at, e-commerce was up 7% from last year, which was already our biggest e-commerce holiday season ever. And so, e-commerce, that means a lot of freight's moving and everything. But here's the number that jumps out. So it's a 58 upstream for inventory levels, 33.9 downstream. That is a rapid contraction in inventory at the retail level. And so that actually, it's kind of the happy ending to the story we told all the way through 24, which was we were bringing all this inventory in, and are we doing it to stay ahead of port strikes, stay ahead of anything? We brought it in to sell it. And it looks like, that 33.9 tells you that we sold a lot of inventory. Consumers felt good. We had a good holiday season. And one of the things we've talked about a lot in the last 6 months when I come on is, hey, it seems like seasonality is back. That's seasonality, being down to a 33.9. Now, in terms of things coming in, I think it's a combination. One is we sold everything we had, so we got to do our normal restocking. Two, we did see sort of future predictions, especially at the retail level, change in terms of what we thought we were going to do for bringing inventories in. Okay, so just for example, if we look at what downstream retailers were predicting for future inventory levels going forward for the next year in October, so we look pre-election, it was 55.6. 55.6 is we're bringing inventory in, but that's close to JIT, like we're turning things over quickly. Okay, if we look at what we had in December at those future predictions, downstream was all the way up to 69.4. So we jumped 14 points at the retail level for how much do we want to build inventory levels up. And I think that's a reflection of what you guys were talking about before, some of this nervousness around potential trade policy. And we just heard earlier this week that maybe some tariffs will get announced on February 1st. So next time I come back on the show, we'll maybe be able to talk about it a little more. But clearly right now, the downstream folks are concerned that there will be some tariffs. And I think we're seeing a little bit of things push forward. And that would really be a departure from what we had, because 2024, JIT was back. That was really the comeback of JIT was 2024. And now with these sort of future predictions we see with people being a little worried about trade policy, It seems like we're going back towards more of like the 2021 JIC policy, where it's let's just bring it all over, so we have it, not just in time, but just in case. And getting back to what Tony said about warehousing prices, that will certainly not be deflationary for warehousing prices.
Yeah.
I think on the storage side, they could have a pretty good year because we're pulling things forward. The difference, by the way, just real one thing, unlike when in 2022 when we had too much inventory, the consumer looks strong still. So that will be a difference from 2025 to 2022 as far as things stand now. It's not going to be like 2022 where we had all this inventory and nothing to do with it. There's nothing that tells us right now in our data that consumers are going to slow down. And so we're bringing stuff over, but it won't be the sort of standstill freight nightmare we had in 2022 because it seems like those things will keep moving.
That was actually good. You answered my question because I was going to be like, well, we see this growth in inventory. If that place comes to fruition, do we see a similar situation, what we saw in late 21, early 22, when retailers realized, hey, we've got way too much inventory for what consumers are buying and we need to liquidate? But I think you answered it perfectly already without even having to get into it. But I mean, I think looking at the warehousing side, I think it's an area that maybe me and Zach here don't talk too often about, mainly because it's one of those areas that it
doesn't change a ton.
It seems like it's always growing, right? It feels like it's always growing. It's always becoming more expensive. I mean, kind of just talk through the warehousing element of the LMI. First off, the three metrics, like the utilization versus the capacity, and then price. Is that just the outcome of the other two? And then, I mean, what really sets these in motion? Across the board.
Well, in your defense, the show is not called Storageonomics, so I think it makes sense that we talk more about transportation. So I would say warehousing is in capacity is almost always a function of inventory. But warehousing is interesting, especially at the price level, because the price changes, but it's not the sort of quick whipping around like we see in transportation. Warehousing prices has literally never contracted. In the 8.5 years we've been doing this, it has always been above 50. Even warehousing utilization has only gone below 50 a couple times. And part of that, especially on the price side, is warehousing prices tend to be based on longer term contracts. And so a lot of people now, I think, are actually excited because if you signed a contract in 2022, that was like the all-time most expensive time to sign a warehousing contract. And so if you had a 3-year deal, and that's a common length, and now it's coming up in 2025, I think you're hoping maybe you can renegotiate. Now, unfortunately, maybe that's happening right as another wave of inventory comes in. But warehousing is interesting because transportation is like it's like the hair. It's fast, it's slow, it moves all over the place, it's very active. Warehousing is kind of like the tortoise and the hair. It's slow, it's steady, but ultimately, it seems like it kind of wins the race because you don't see these big ups and the big downs. Warehousing is sort of a high floor, low ceiling, and doesn't have the range that we see in freight. In terms of where it is right now, prices were 61 in December, capacity 57, prices were 68 and utilization was 61. That 68 is a very solid number. And if you look forward to where we're going with warehousing, it reads in at 75 for our 12-month out prediction. That's a very high number for warehousing. I know we've had it up higher before, but it's not like transportation, which can get up into the 80s pretty easily. Warehousing, what that tells you is that folks are expecting we're pulling a lot of inventory forward. And probably some of that inventory is going to be in places where it's not necessarily cheap to hold on to it. And I think this gets back to some of the way that warehousing networks have changed, where we have way more storage in Phoenix, Vegas, Dallas, Austin, these places that are sort of middle mile, like, we're because there's no more space in California.
Right.
And so we're sort of halfway across the country. But because of the fulfillment side of it, it's not just distribution, they tend to be more expensive. So I don't know if it'll be as good of a year as 2022 was in the industrial real estate market, but 2025 is certainly looking better, and getting away from JIT will be good for them. I've seen a couple things just anecdotally talking to people they think we were at our sort of peak available capacity for warehousing, which is only in the mid 50s, peak available capacity at the end of last year. And everyone I talk to thinks this is capacity is going to come back down, prices are going to go back up, and it's going to be another strong year for warehousing going forward.
Yeah, I'd kind of like to expand on that a little bit. I mean, if we pull up the chart, the warehousing chart one more time, and look at the relationship between capacity, which is in blue, little teal blue line, and utilization, which is in the white shaded mountain view. They seem to have been in equilibrium almost for the last little bit, a couple of notches here and there. But is this kind of where we expect it to live, is in this state of continual balance? Or do you think with that 75 expectation, are we saying that, is this an inflationary process of just having more expensive warehousing? Or is this necessarily a problem with the amount of capacity that's going to be available in the future?
I think we're seeing capacity tighten up a little bit. But even our future capacity reading is still it's at 57. So it's almost exactly where it is now in terms, I think you're spot on when you say it's equilibrium.
Yeah.
The only time we've really seen in the 8 years we've been doing this, people really being nervous about warehousing was at the height of the pandemic when we absolutely didn't have enough of anything, basically. But now it's not like transportation where we swing back and forth. And so I think right now we're close to an equilibrium, and you could almost draw a straight line going across the top of warehousing prices basically for the last 9 months, and it almost hasn't moved. So I think we're sort of expecting more of the same in 2025, and a lot of that price increase is probably just due to a little more competition for the space that exists because more folks are pulling inventory forward and, again, getting away from that JIT piece like we talked about.
I think we've talked warehousing, we've talked inventory. There's one element we really haven't talked, and that's the transportation piece. And I'm looking here at the future predictions, and you start looking at that transportation prices, you start looking 12 months out. That's pretty big growth in expectations for where prices are headed. I mean, and not really no change in the capacity front. I mean, overall, it seems like we're headed to a market that is going to feel tighter overall, kind of in line with what we've been saying for a few months now, that the market is kind of changing. It's just a matter of when does it really kind of show up in the data.
Right. So, I would say we've certainly moved towards a much stronger place than we had been. I mean, if you look at transportation prices this month, December, it was 66.8. That's up 3 points. And that is our highest rate of change for that number since April of 2022, which is really kind of the very beginning of the freight recession. Conversely, transportation capacity is at 53. So those are 13 points apart. Again, the best sort of split we've had, since that April of 2022. Now, in terms of where we're going, people are pretty robust. People are pretty confident that we're going to keep going up. Our number for price is 77.7 for 12 months out, and capacity is down at 50. And what I think is so interesting about capacity staying at 50 is we still haven't seen capacity contract since early 2022. And you can see this. I love the sort of contrast of these two lines you have here, where you have price versus capacity. In the past, we've seen really wide gaps between them because we don't have that much flex capacity in the system. We built a lot of capacity during COVID, and also we're smarter now about where our networks are. So I think that gets lost sometimes, and that's one of the reasons why it's so great that we're not having an East Coast port strike. The reason you see price and capacity being so far apart, if you look back in those 2021 times, is because everything was coming through California. Right. And now we've really balanced out. A lot of stuff comes up through Mexico, stuff comes down through Canada, things come from the East Coast, the West Coast. We've really balanced not only the volume of freight availability, but the distribution of it. And so we have a really nice system right now where we can see the pink line going up, but it's not going up sharply because there was some crazy event. Like that sharp spike you see in early 2020 is $1 trillion of stimulus. I don't think that's happening again. And so what you see now is just a gradual organic sort of recovery. And I think that's really, really solid. Now, let me tell you one other thing before we keep jumping here. So we're predicting for the future 77 and 50. Okay, that's the prediction. I want to give you guys an idea of how accurate our future predictions usually are. And again, this isn't us. This is the the good people who take this. Our future predictions for transportation capacity from December 23 was 51. We were 2 points off. Our future prediction for transportation price from December 23 was 70.3. We were about 4 points. We were only a few points off there too, 4 points off. And so we've been within, 2 to 5 points of what the predictions are. And if you go back and look at other metrics in other months, we're about the same. Our overall was 59.9. We're at like 61 right now. So we're right in there. And so I would feel pretty good, as long as there's not some sort of black swan thing. 77 is a very strong number for price growth, but it's not so strong that we're going to see those sharp upticks where inflation goes crazy. If you add up all of our price metrics together, looking towards the future, if they ever get above 240, that's where inflation gets really bad. Right now, our future prediction is 225. That's within normal realms of inflation. And it's sort of this happy Goldilocks medium where we're seeing strong freight prices, but not so strong. So it's good for carriers, but not so strong that it's going to kill shippers and by extension consumers. So if we stay on this trajectory we're on, if that pink line going up slowly, the white line staying low but not dipping below 50, we should be in a pretty strong place economically in 2025.
I've said it a lot, and it's not always welcomed, but a nice, stable growth rate is exactly what we want, economically speaking, for everybody involved. It may not be the most exciting from a media standpoint, and certainly from a transportation provider standpoint, they kind of like those big spikes to an extent, but then we always end up in these strong retractions or these strong downturns. I think this is, from a carrier perspective, this is what you want. This is a healthy contraction. We're still cleaning out some of the capacity a little bit, and the market is reaching a better equilibrium, if you will. But that's a sustainable place to be. Do you see any reason that, a 77 prediction on prices in 12 months seems like kind of a more of a catalyst, more of a cataclysm than a stable growth rate. Do you think that that's a little overstated because of expectation? And we only have 2 minutes left. So,
right. Well, for comparison, we were at a 63 this December. We were at a 43 last December. So we wouldn't be moving as much as we did over the last year.
Wow.
So I don't, you forget what was going on. So no, I think what it reflects is the increase in inventories coming through and an expectation that consumers continuing to get stronger. Right. Inflation is pretty much, knock on wood, is pretty much done. So as long as we don't see anything really serious with tariffs or labor issues, I think the economy looks like it's in good shape. And it seems like, like we said, warehousing is slow. Freight market reacts. The freight market is clearly looking towards a strong 2025 because strong economic activity overall will be great for the freight market.
I want to be. Sorry, I want to be on the same page. I like your picture you're painting is so good. I'm wanting to I have to challenge it a little bit, but I that's what we see is this up and to the right, not dramatic, nothing that's really that bothersome. I guess from a shipper perspective, you're seeing inflation return to your prices a little bit, but it's not dramatic like we saw COVID, right?
No, it's not that level. And again, it's because we're in much better place in terms of the available capacity and in terms of the distribution of that capacity. Supply chain networks are so much smarter than they were 5 years ago. It's really a testament to the kind of people who would watch the show, that we're much more robust and I think more resilient. And even if there are tariffs, we're going to be able to handle them better than we handled the last round 6 years ago.
Look at you living in that world, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on this week and this month. And hopefully we will talk to you next month. We'll talk about tariffs and how they're actually playing out. Maybe we'll see. Trump is kind of a wild card in that regard, but thanks again. And everybody, of course, can reach out to you at, they can go to thelmi.com, right?
Yep. Yes, yeah, the-lmi.com. You can see the last year of,
Yep.
of reports are up there for free, and we'll try to get Trump to take the survey. Maybe that'll help us out in February.
Yeah, right. Well, stay warm out there in Colorado. We'll try to, well, we're a lost cause here. Everybody have a great week.